And what I like about Jacob Rees-Mogg, and when I say like, it's a relative term, but what I like about it is he really truly has that little self-awareness. And part of that is when you grow up with less boundaries or a big safety net or not having to rely on other people, you really get potentially too much freedom to just be yourself irrespective of the consequences. And you use phrases like a vast number of children in my home without being aware of it. But let's go on to hear what he says about tax.
Order! Order!
Hello, and welcome to Barry's Economics. Today is an analysis episode. It's the type of episode I want to do more of. I've already done one on the rest is politics, and I plan to do a couple more on the rest is politics. But for today, a video that came up on my algorithm was Jacob Rees-Mogg talking about the mansion tax. And I watched it and just thought, actually, yeah, let's look at Jacob Rees-Mogg. The way I'll put it is, I'm going to look at him up close so that you don't have to. You're welcome. So for anyone that doesn't know British politics, Jacob Rees-Mogg was a politician in Somerset from 2010 to 2024. He was very close to Boris Johnson and was known around politics as really being the face of aristocracy in some way. He's exactly as you imagine what Lord Fauntleroy would look like as an adult. And this video is fascinating to look at in detail. But yeah, let's start at the beginning and just see how Jacob Rees-Mogg decides to open a video about the mansion tax.
You may reasonably think that I have a vested interest in the question of a mansion tax. I can't claim that where I'm recording this is what estate agents call a bijou residence. It's one that has sufficient rooms for a vast number of children.
A vast number of children. And I'm so sorry, you have to forgive me. This isn't strictly analysis. It's just pointing out how little self-awareness he has. If I use the phrase a vast number of children, there is room for a vast number of children in my house, I think most of us would stop, pause, and go, you know what, I don't think I put that right because it makes me sound like a nonce. Not only that, I don't think he's aware of how much he actually looks like the child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
There are children here somewhere. I can smell them.
Surely he knows he looks like that. But he doesn't. Again, the lack of self-awareness. Well, you see, I am in a mansion, and this isn't what you would call a bijou residence. Okay, all right, breathe in, breathe out.
But that's not actually my own personal interest, the reason why I'm going to talk about the mansion tax and capital taxation in general. Capital taxation is bad economically and is essentially used not for growth reasons or for fiscal reasons, but to punish people, class of people that a government doesn't like.
But it speaks of such confidence, which obviously we've heard of in authority bias. That confidence almost makes you buy in. You go, oh, well, okay, well, let's hear him out because he seems so assured, but there's no apology. Whereas if you reframed it, it's almost like canvassing turkeys as to what should be eaten at Christmas. Hello, I'm a turkey. Yes, a talking turkey, but don't bother your mind with that right now. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk about eating turkeys for Christmas. And you might say that you wouldn't value my opinion because I've quite literally got skin in the game. But I'm not worried about myself, of course. You know, if you wanted to eat me, that would be absolutely fine. But I'm worried about you and your health and well-being and the well-being of your family. And I have to tell you that turkeys are bad for your family and health. You know what's better? Goose. Yes. Eat yourself a nice tasty goose for Christmas. That's what you want, not turkey. No. This has been a public information announcement on behalf of your general health. There you go. And it's not just the hypocrisy of talking about a mansion tax from a mansion and expecting us to just ignore it.
Capital taxation is bad economically and is essentially used not for growth reasons or for fiscal reasons, but to punish people, class of people that a government doesn't like. The left has always used capital taxation as a means of class warfare.
But it's also the fact that he immediately frames it as a class war without any context to any evidence or reason to say it. And I do think part of that is because our opinions come from the people that we hang around with, we spend time with. And that elite, the people that come from that background, it almost slips off the tongue. You can see it in Gary's interview with Rory as well.
I think your class anger is not letting you see some of the realities of politics.
Out of nowhere, class war, class war. And I say that because no matter how reasonable somebody seems, their biases are often entrenched. We get used to talking from the perspective of how we've been anchored. And that's something called anchoring bias or anchoring. There are studies that have been done, a serious number of studies, about how your very perspectives in the world are anchored purely around the people that you grew up with.
It's less true in other parts of the country, but property prices have risen so much that people in their 90s who could have lived in their family home for 70 years, or possibly even more, now find that their property is very valuable, but they're in fact living off the state pension. So if you suddenly say to them, they've got to pay an extra tax, even at 1% over the value of £2 million, you will find that there are individuals who are very badly affected by this.
Asset rich and cash poor. Now I mentioned this in more detail in a video, but here's a snippet about that very argument. The idea of somebody being asset rich and cash poor. It kind of sounds reasonable, doesn't it, when somebody says, oh, this has been in my family for generations. We just don't have that much cash. We just got all this land, but it doesn't give us any money. The hypocrisy in it is, for me, is that my direct experience has been people that I know that have bought their house over their generation having to sell that house in order to pay for their care. Like the government at the moment in England, if you've got more than £23,000 in assets, including your home, you have to pay for your care. If old people have to liquidate their assets to pay for care, it seems fair to ask millionaires to liquidate their assets to pay for society. Because if you're sitting on £30 million worth of assets, that isn't poverty, which he doesn't really take in any way. He takes it as a solid that, well, if you don't have cash, well, you shouldn't be turfed out of your home. And one of the things I find incredible is that his go-to example for a working family.
Over the value of £2 million, you will find that there are individuals who are very badly affected by this. But they're not the only ones, because London property particularly is so expensive that most people living in London, young people who are trying to get on the property ladder, doing well in their careers, have large mortgages. So to have a £2.5 million property in London, well, it may have a £2 million mortgage on it. So suddenly to whack that with an extra tax would be desperately unfair on the people who are growing their careers, growing their financial success, but aren't in a position to pay an extra £5,000. They've taken out as big a mortgage as they can. They want to live near their work. They're working long hours to make this work for them and for their families. Perhaps both spouses are working. Perhaps they have children. Perhaps they want to have children, but they won't be able to afford to because of the extra tax that will be taken for them.
And one of the things I find incredible is that his go-to example for a working family is a £2 million house. Obviously one with rooms for a vast number of children. But what do we know about housing stock in the UK? Well, one thing we definitely know is that the housing stock of the UK that is worth more than £2 million is 1.5%. That's 1.5% of houses he's arguing for there. Not the other 98.5% of houses that would benefit from a mansion tax. That is his go-to to, well, I'll give you an example of a very fair example of just a regular family with a £2 million house. And again, this, I can't stress enough, this man was in Parliament for 14 years, and his go-to for struggling family is a £2 million house. Now, the reason why that's instructive is that he was making laws in the land, and that's his go-to for struggle. And it does make you wonder how many people are in Parliament now that have that perspective, and that also are so confident of rationalising that perspective that they will film and make a video, put it on the internet, and give the most outrageously mad justification for not taxing them in their mansion. And it really goes to show how little any of us can see our own bias. But particularly somebody that's been in Parliament making decisions for 14 years. But he does it with such confidence. Like, let's listen to his next idea.
So either it's going to be unfair and hit people striving in their careers who have a big mortgage, or it would be immensely complicated and hedged round with anti-avoidance mechanisms. So that's another reason, a second reason why it wouldn't work.
You see the complications of a wealth tax, which again shows this study, which is that most people optimize or make decisions on efficiency rather than outcome. This is a huge bias in the human brain, is that we often want to do the thing that's easy rather than the thing that's right. I talk about this in the video here, about why we end up taxing the poor more than the rich. I use the analogy in this story. There's somebody walking out late at night and they come across somebody looking on their hands and knees underneath a streetlight, and they stop and they go, "Are you all right, mate?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm just looking for my key." Just, "Oh, well, I'll give you a hand." And they're on their hands and knees looking all over the ground for his key, and they can't find it. After about 10 minutes, the guy that had walked past kind of went, "Have you got any more kind of specific area where you lost it under the light?" And the person responds, "Oh no, I didn't lose it under the light. I lost it about 50 meters over there, but it's dark over here, and this is where the light is." Which is a perfect analogy for why we end up taxing by income tax rather than wealth taxes, is that it's a lot easier to look under the light, even if it's the wrong place to look. Likewise, you can hear the motivated reasoning in Rees-Mogg's analysis of, well, it's complicated. A wealth tax on assets, how are you going to do that? Let's just keep things simple, shall we? And not tax me. Because goose is the delicious thing to eat at Christmas.
Now you may say people living in £3 million houses are very rich, but I hope I've explained to you that actually they aren't necessarily as rich as it may seem.
Goose is delicious at Christmas. Don't you see? It's not about me, I'm thinking of you. And this final point that he brings up about taxation being about income.
What you want in a tax system is to raise the money that you need to spend with the least damaging economic consequences. And that means taxing things like income and expenditure, where the money has to be earned and the money has to be spent.
Is really useful and really important, and one that I'm going to go into in a video very shortly. Real wages are stagnant. Any real wealth that's being brought up is coming from stocks, from gold, from investments, from asset purchase. Wealth isn't being created from income, and yet nobody's saying that in the public sphere, because most of the people are getting their wealth from assets, so they don't want you to take that money. Christmas is coming and the geese are getting fat, not the turkeys, the geese are getting fat.
So essentially, the mansion tax is merely a symptom of bad capital taxation policy.
It even has a better sound. Christmas is coming and the geese are getting fat. Yes. All of those arguments wouldn't even occur to Jacob Rees-Mogg because he doesn't talk to anybody from the hard end of inequality. And you can just see it so clearly because his struggling family have a £2 million house rather than are renting somewhere for £1,000 a month and can barely afford that rent. There's a part of this video that felt, for me, like shooting fish in a barrel. But I kind of wanted to see whether I could find a little bit of distance. His perspective is so clearly off. Even from his inability to know that he looks like the child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. If there's anyone else that you'd like me to do an analysis of, or a video an analysis of, there'll be an analysis of A Diary of a CEO coming up soon, and also The Rest is Politics. And I've got a few other ones in the pipeline too. But thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see anything else, pop it in the comments. Thanks very much.
Order! Order!